I can think of a number of people that I would love to hear you interview. And here I'm not revealing the reasons why, but except for the fact that I think you would be uniquely suited to bring out the important components of the conversation that other people have not been able to do, which, for instance, Liz Holmes. This is one of the most mysterious and yet disliked people on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
She's sort of synonymous with deception.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there have been any real interviews of her since the whole thing. I haven't followed that case. I listened to the book and I followed it a little bit because it was happening in my hometown, right? Theranos was right up the road. The building's still there. It's interesting. It's some of the most premier real estate in Silicon Valley, but nobody wants it. It's sort of like it's very hard to sell a home where somebody committed suicide or committed a murder, even if it's a beautiful home. It sort of feel like the Theranos building is that building. So that would be a really interesting interview. I would love to hear that interview.
One of the most interesting dark human beings in science.
Yeah, and then there will even be people that say, was it even science, right? It might have all been deception. It might have been one part deception, one part goal setting mixed in with clearly that there were so many factors impacting what happened. I think the big difference between Theranos and that story and some of the other stories about Silicon Valley where people promised a lot more than they could deliver is they were promising things that were directly related to health and healthcare. People were taking blood tests with the understanding that the data they were getting was important information about sexually transmitted diseases and other diseases and making real world decisions on the basis of that. Whereas if you remember when the iPhone first came out and Steve Jobs was still alive and the phones were dropping calls if you held it in a particular way, and his response was a little flip. He said, hey folks, it's a phone, as if like, don't get so worked up.
Yeah.
But people held him understandably to a very high standard. She would sort of, it seemed, and I don't know because I certainly wasn't there, seemed like she sort of adopted this idea that you could get it wrong a bunch of times before you get it right, except if the allegations are true. And I think she was found guilty, I believe, on a number of counts, that a number of the things that they were doing were impacting real world decision making. So Steve's point about the phone, it's just a phone. Well, it depends on the call. If you're calling 911, then it's not just a phone, right? But in the case of blood tests and disease, that's serious. I think that the Theranos case was super interesting to me because of the number of people from major universities and from government that both trusted her and the number of people who did not trust her and yet either didn't speak up or no one listened to them. It was only in the forensic version of it that everyone said, oh yeah, I knew that she was lying, et cetera, et cetera. They were lying. There are multiple people involved in those lies, apparently. But I have a deep interest in the neuroscience of narcissism, sociopathy, and some of the darker aspects of the mind. So yeah, maybe someday maybe we'll do a podcast together.
Yeah,
it can be like in the kind of early '90s version of talk shows where we darken the lights and we do it together. You can use 100%. Your voice because your voice is much more sinister sounding than mine.
Good cop, bad cop. Well, it'd be interesting from a scientific perspective of somebody who is a sociopath or a psychopath, how to reveal something real about them. I think that requires not just, I don't know what that requires. That requires the same skill that it takes to be a good therapist.
Right. And some therapists won't work with sociopaths because they don't feel any progress can be made. Some therapists will work with sociopaths because for the wealthy ones, they often they want their money. I think most therapists are good and benevolent, but there's some that will do it just the same way lawyers will work with criminals knowing they're criminals, right? Oftentimes because they're criminals. There are certain domains of psychiatry that are more tractable than others, right? Borderlines are interesting, I should just mention, because they have this phenomenon of splitting. So in the world of psychology, the idea is that being neurotic is actually the goal. The idea that you could be feel something and then work a lot to overcome it, or have some sort of defense mechanism in place, but that's not destructive. That's actually a pretty healthy state to be in. It's provided it's not destructive. Psychotic is truly delusional thinking about reality. And the idea is that borderline intermittently split between psychotic and neurotic. That's why it's called, there's beautiful work by Melanie Klein that describes this, which I'm just now kind of delving into. But So the borderline is the person who is like, I love you, I love you, I love you, and then truly feels as if they hate you and you become the bad object. Borderlines are challenging for psychologists because of the splitting, right? Schizophrenics are challenging because of the detachment from reality. And narcissists are challenging because they're often so charming that even the therapists are charmed.